And now for a little something different. Today, instead of the usual format where we tick through news items to discuss, we're going to take a look at a few examples of how terrible the left is, generously provided to us through social media. Now, the goal here is not merely to dunk on the left, though we certainly will. The goal is to understand the minds of the hard left so that we might better combat them both in the culture and politically. The fact of the matter is, there's no real reason why normal, productive, patriotic Americans should be losing any battles to the left. We have an advantage over them that they cannot combat and that they will never have over us. We just need the conviction to wield it. Also, for X subscribers, YouTube channel members, and audio podcast subscribers, look for today's edition of The Smoke-Filled Room, a supporter-exclusive bonus show where I veer off into expanded topics that don't always fit the mold. Today, I'm going to offer my spoiler-heavy review of the new James Gunn Superman film, with a particular emphasis on its cultural and political messaging. There's been a lot of heated debate online about this movie, some of it triggered by Gunn himself after he claimed that the film is political and about immigration and kindness. But I don't think folks are discerning the real meaning of the story's themes. I've seen it twice, and it wasn't woke at all. In fact, it did something I never expected to see in a modern Superman film. It brought back the American way. Become a supporter today for access to my breakdown. Welcome to Closing Argument.
4, 3, 2. Closing Argument with Walter Hudson.
Though it may not seem like it if all you see from me is my X feed, which is usually full of sharp jabs at my political opponents, I truly do pick my battles. I ignore far more leftist criticism than I respond to. Far more. But there are times when I choose to engage and do so without mercy. The difference between when I do engage and when I don't is determined by whether I believe that the public interaction will demonstrate something valuable to those who see it. Merely bickering and tossing insults is not worthwhile, but if you can make an actual point, if you can present an argument and draw out behavior in your opponents that demonstrates who they are and what they believe, that is useful. One such opportunity presented itself this week when I engaged with an X post from Jeremiah Ellison, a former Minneapolis City Council member whose votes and espoused views frequently align with the Democrat Socialists of America, even though he's never officially sought their endorsement. Jeremiah is the son of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and he was one of the leading voices promoting the effort to defund the police here in Minnesota in the wake of the George Floyd riots in 2020. The interaction between him and I is noteworthy because he's not just some fringe activist. He's a former elected official. He's a well-known and well-respected figure within the Democrat Party here in Minnesota, and his views and actions are indicative of what many within his party believe and who they are. But before we get to that, some context is in order. So all this started with an interview that former Minnesota Congressman and potential gubernatorial candidate Dean Phillips recently had on CNN. Asked about whether the Democrat Party's big tent was big enough for avowed socialists like New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, Phillips' answer was, to his enormous credit, no. Take a look.
And, you know, one of the things that I guess one of the questions here is the current DNC chair, Ken Martin, fellow Minnesotan, used you as an example in saying the party is a big tent. It can welcome people from different ideological, geographic perspectives. I think he used the example of you couldn't win a race in Ilhan Omar's district and she couldn't win a race in yours. Is there room for you and Mamdani in the Democratic Party?
You know, I think it's a fine question. I think it's one that many Republicans have been asking about, whether there's room for traditional conservatives in a party now led by MAGA Republicans like Donald Trump. The answer ultimately, I think, is no. We do share many of the same values. In fact, most Americans share a lot of the same values. But as a political party, yes, you want diversity. You want some differences of opinion, perspective, life story, politics, and experience. But when you have socialists in the Democratic Party, I don't know how anybody could argue that that would be beneficial for the party or for the country. Therein lies the great challenge. Same thing on the right, Omar. Is MAGA the future of the Republican Party? If it is, there is going to be a new, grand, successful third party in America because the overwhelming majority of Americans want neither far left or far right politics. They want decency, they want common sense, competency, and cooperation. And no party right now is elevating candidates who represent those ideals.
Setting aside the moral equivocation that Phillips fallaciously makes between socialists and Americans who simply want to make America great again, I mean, there's really no comparison between those two groups whatsoever. One is good, healthy, productive, virtuous, and the other is demonstrably evil and aligned with an ideology that has killed as many as 100 million people in the last century. But setting that aside, Phillips' point here is obviously well considered and aligned with basic human decency. No, you shouldn't have room in your party for people who want to seize the means of production, as Mamdani has said. You shouldn't have room in your party for people who want to globalize the Intifada, language which Mamdani has refused to condemn. Put simply, you shouldn't want genocidal, racist tyrants inside your big tent. And I have to pause here to let those words sink in, because I know we've all become numb to them. Terms like genocide and racist and tyranny have been so overused and misused, particularly by the radical left, that the gravity of what those words actually mean has been diminished. And frankly, I suspect that's a big part of the reason such terms are misused, to dilute their true meaning, to reduce them to nothing more than insults and political labels. But when we allow that to happen, when we lose the ability to distinguish between a word and its meaning, and if we lose the discernment to identify actual evil when we see it, then we're going to be left open to real harm. So I'm going to say it again, and I want you to really hear me. Zohran Mamdani is a genocidal, racist tyrant. When I say that, I'm not just calling him a name. I'm not launching a rhetorical or political attack. I am accurately identifying what he objectively is, and I can make an argument to justify the claim. That's the key distinction between those of us on the right who use these words and when those on the left use those words. When they call us names, it's just an insult. It's just rhetoric. It's just a political smear. When we identify them with those words, it's an accurate and demonstrable assessment of who they truly are. In Mamdani's case, as noted before, he refuses to condemn the phrase globalize the Intifada. He's been asked directly multiple times whether he condemns this chant, which originated in anti-Israel protests and is widely interpreted as a call to extend violent Palestinian uprisings against Jews and Israelis worldwide. In one interview, when pressed 3 separate times, Mamdani dodged, saying that as a potential mayor, he shouldn't police speech. But that entirely evades the question that was asked. He wasn't asked whether someone should be allowed to say globalize the Intifada without going to jail. That would be a question about free speech. He was asked whether he condemns the content of that particular phrase, whether he condemns the idea that it expresses. Does he agree with or welcome the idea that the Intifada should be globalized? That's what he was asked. And he evaded the responsibility to answer that question. And it shouldn't be a hard question to answer. It shouldn't be hard to say, yes, I condemn the phrase globalize the Intifada because it refers to periods of Palestinian terrorism, including suicide bombings and attacks that killed hundreds of Israeli civilians, including children. And I don't want to see that effort globalized After all, to globalize the Intifada would mean to spread that same terror on a worldwide scale, targeting Jewish communities everywhere. Such hostile action would not be a political protest. It would not be legitimate political speech. It would be genocide. And Mamdani's refusal to reject that shows his complicity in anti-Semitic rhetoric that fuels real ongoing harm. And if calling for the targeting of Jews worldwide is not racism, singling out one ethnic group for global violence, then I don't know what is. But it doesn't stop there. Mamdani's tyrannical streak shines through in his open embrace of communist ideology. In a resurfaced 2021 video from a Democrat Socialists of America conference, he explicitly stated that, quote, the end goal is seizing the means of production, unquote. Now, this isn't some abstract socialist slogan. It's straight out of Karl Marx's playbook, calling for the forcible takeover of private property, businesses, and industry by the state. And that means, at root, taking over people. If you can't control your property, your business, or your industry, which is the fruit of your labor, then you are not free. And none of this is hypothetical or speculative. History shows us where this leads. To authoritarian regimes like the Soviet Union or Mao's China, where seizing meant mass expropriation, famine, and the deaths of millions. Refugees living in America today from communist countries have called Mamdani's words chilling and dangerous, reminding us that this isn't progressive policy, it's a blueprint for tyranny. As a New York Assembly member and now a mayoral candidate, Mamdani wants to bring this to New York City, defunding the police, taxing white neighborhoods to redistribute wealth, and even government-run grocery stores. Now, that's not a democratic republic, that's coercive control, where the state dictates who owns what and silences opposition. None of this is debatable. None of this can be argued. It's all objective, all factual, all substantiated, and all true. It doesn't just tell us what Mamdani believes, it tells us who he is. So when CNN asks Dean Phillips whether the Democrat Party has a tent big enough for Zohran Mamdani, and Phillips emphatically says, no, that is a ray of hope for our nation. That's Phillips saying, no, we are not the party of genocide. No, we are not the party of racism. And no, we are not the party of tyranny. Now, as a Republican, it's in my political interest to disagree with Phillips on that point and to attempt to paint all Democrats with a broad brush and say, nope, you all own this, you're all terrible people. But that's not in my interest as an American citizen or as someone who values the truth. Because the fact of the matter is, there are many Democrats who do not agree with Zohran Mamdani. There are many people who vote Democrat who don't think like Zohran Mamdani. People like some of my family and friends. And it's in our interest as a nation to have two healthy major political parties that both reject these evil, anti-human, anti-freedom, anti-American ideas. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening. Instead, you have figures like Ken Martin, the former chair of the Democrat Party right here in Minnesota, and the current head of the DNC in charge of the party nationally, explicitly saying that people like Zohran Mamdani are welcome in his party. Here's that clip.
What about concerns from some of your Jewish colleagues in particular about him not outright condemning the phrase globalize the Intifada in a recent interview? Some of your Jewish colleagues have said that that could be very disturbing, potentially dangerous. Do you agree with that?
You know, there's no candidate in this party that I agree 100% of the time with, to be honest with you. There's things that I don't agree with Mamdani that he said. But at the end of the day, I always believe, as a Democratic Party chair in Minnesota for the last 14 years, and now the chair of the DNC, that you win through addition. You win by bringing people into your coalition. We have conservative Democrats, we have centrist Democrats, we have labor progressives like me, and we have this new brand of Democrat, which is the leftists. And we win by bringing people into that coalition. And at the end of the day, for me, that's the type of party we're going to lead. We are a big tent party. Yes, it leads to dissent and debate, and there's differences of opinions on a whole host of issues. But we should celebrate that as a party and recognize at the end of the day, we're better because...
Two things are noteworthy here. Obviously, the most shocking thing is that Martin is saying a genocidal, racist tyrant is welcome in his party. But the other thing that's really telling here is that he doesn't just specify Mamdani. He categorizes Mamdani and gives people like him a name. That label is leftist. Martin says that leftists are part of the Democrat Party coalition. And in the context where he's saying that, where he's talking about an avowed socialist who wants to seize the means of production, Martin is acknowledging that Mamdani is the standard bearer of the left. I mean, he might as well be saying, hey, if you look up leftist in the dictionary, you're going to see a picture of Zohran Mamdani along with a description of everything he says and believes. That's the left. Not according to me, but according to Ken Martin, according to the current chair of the Democrat National Committee. And that's remarkable. Now, I say all of that just to lay the groundwork for what we're really here to talk about. All of that, everything we just talked about, was just context. So Dean Phillips has his interview with CNN, where he says Mamdani and other socialists should not be included in the Democrats' big tent. That's where Jeremiah Ellison comes in. He takes to X, where he posts the video of the interview along with this comment, quote, "People like Dean love to say neither far right nor far left, but never want to name which left ideas they think are equal to which right-wing ideas. The far left equals healthcare for all, housing is a human right. Far right equals racial purity, no rights for workers. Dean stands for nothing," unquote. Now, there's a lot to break down in that comment, and I could spend an entire episode just dissecting that. But given all the context we just discussed, the unassailable proof I've just laid out demonstrating that Zohran Mamdani is a genocidal racist tyrant, consider that according to Jeremiah Ellison, the failure to include that within the Democrat Party means that Dean Phillips, quote, stands for nothing, unquote. In other words, you're either with the socialists or you're not worth a damn. That's what Ellison is saying about a member of his own party, and not just a random member, but a former congressman. And again, it's not just anyone who's saying it. It's the son of the currently elected Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, who is a former Minneapolis City Council member. And it's worth noting that Keith Ellison has supported his son politically, so Keith doesn't come out of this clean either. I mean, even before we even take a look at any of the things he's said or done. And again, I have to pause here to really let all of this sink in. While the left calls conservatives and Republicans names, say we're racist and fascist and call us Nazis and Gestapo, all without defining any of those terms, they are in real life, in real time, openly embracing the actual authoritarianism of socialists. It's like the KKK accusing you of being racist. It's like the mafia accusing you of being a criminal. That's what we're dealing with. And I pause here to point that out and to really let it sink in, because this is their Achilles heel. This is their major vulnerability. This is why they will be defeated and become the scuzziest muck on the ash heap of history. This right here, their ability to accuse you of being what they are, and their ability to get you to accept it, to endure it, or even just to engage with it defensively as if you have something to apologize for. That is their foremost weapon. It's their foremost weapon in the culture, and it's their foremost weapon in politics. But it's also their greatest vulnerability. Why? Because it depends entirely on your willingness to accept their premise. If you don't accept their premise, if you refuse to lend credence to their smears and slanders, if you refuse to accept their false claim to the moral high ground, they're left with precisely nothing. They become naked. They become impotent. They have no recourse. And that's what I want to demonstrate to you today by taking you through this back and forth that Jeremiah Ellison and I had on X. So I responded to Ellison and focused in on one thing in particular, his ludicrous claim that the so-called far right seeks racial purity. I said, I guess that's why I've been endorsed by the Minnesota GOP for state office twice and elected both times. What an absolute clown. If racial purity were an actual value on the political right, I would be the last thing they'd tolerate. In my time, I have actually encountered real white supremacists. And I'm not talking about people who have the audacity to say things like children should have fathers or timeliness is a virtue. I'm talking about dyed-in-the-wool, card-carrying white supremacists, unashamed, who actually subscribe to an ideology of racial purity. Folks like Richard Spencer. You know what alt-right Richard Spencer is more afraid of than anything else in the world? Me. People like me. My children. Why? Because we're mixed race. My dad is black. My mom is white. I mean, if you were to look up racial purity in the dictionary, my picture might be there just to show its opposite. I mean, you don't get any less racially pure than me. In fact, I'm fairly certain that the only thing I'm not is Asian, but I wouldn't be surprised if I were wrong. And yet, for some reason, strangely enough, I'm a welcomed figure within the Republican Party of Minnesota. Not only that, but elected within my caucus to be an assistant caucus leader, appointed to the vice chairmanship of the House Judiciary Committee. And by the way, who was I appointed by? The likewise biracial female speaker of the Minnesota House, Lisa Damuth, who's a conservative Republican. So this idea expressed by Ellison that racial purity has any place in right-wing politics is utterly and objectively absurd. And look, I'm not saying that you can't scour the earth and find some hillbilly somewhere who both votes Republican and agrees with Richard Spencer. But you know what we don't do? We don't elect that guy as mayor of New York City or as a city council member in Minneapolis. We don't have our chair of the Republican National Committee on national television saying that Richard Spencer is welcome inside of our big tent. On our side, the fringe truly is the fringe. While on the Democrat side, the fringe is in charge. And that's the great irony of Ellison's post. As he's accusing the right of embracing crazy extreme ideas, he's doing so while defending a candidate, Zohran Mamdani, who is a genocidal, racist tyrant. I mean, that's a hell of a self-own. But setting that aside, let's get back to highlight the tactic that the left uses of accusing you of being terrible in the hope that you'll accept their premise and get all defensive. Ellison responded to my post. Now, did he respond with an argument? Did he demonstrate that Republicans actually value racial purity? Did he provide supporting evidence for that conclusion? Of course not. Instead, he said this, quote, "Yes, you're a black face that spews their ideology, a perfect token," unquote. Wow, okay. So first of all, let's recognize this for what it is at its core. It's just name calling. That's it. And that's quite literally the best Ellison can do because he doesn't have an actual argument, and he knows it. Now, it's worth pausing here to really appreciate the fact that a former Minneapolis City Council member, supported politically by the sitting Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, a respected figure in the Democrat Party within this state, is using the same lame, limp-wristed tactic as a 5-year-old would on a playground. That's all he's got. And we should really bask in how pathetic that is. But there's a larger and more important observation here. Consider the logical inconsistency between Ellison's original statement and this weak follow-up rebuttal. He started off saying that the right values racial purity, but then he turns around and says that they endorse and elect me, a biracial man who is as far from racial purity as a human being can get, because I'm black. I mean, he said, quote, "You're a black face that spews their ideology," unquote. Well, what ideology is that? I mean, according to Ellison, their ideology is racial purity. So is he claiming that I spew that? I mean, is he really saying that I'm out here saying the races should be pure as I spend my nights sleeping next to my white wife and taking my mixed race kids to the movies? Now, obviously, there's something else going on here. He knows full well that I don't either represent or espouse racial purity. That's an inconvenient truth for him, but it's also an obvious one. And even in a world where these people can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, we still all know color when we see it. So what's the real message here? What is Ellison actually saying or attempting? Well, he's hoping that I value being acknowledged as black by other black people. That's what the insult token is really aimed at. It's like being called an Uncle Tom or a coon. The strategy is to aim at the heart and knock the wind out of my chest, to summon what he assumes is my deeply harbored desire for racial affirmation and collective acceptance, to guilt me into feeling like some sort of race traitor for having the audacity to tell the truth. But that strategy only works if I accept the premise. It only works if I base my sense of self-worth on the affirmation of others. It only works if I care whether other people feel good about me more than I care about validity, logic, and truth. But homie, don't play that. And when you reject their premise, when you truly don't care what they think, when you insulate yourself from emotional manipulation by demanding an actual argument, insults cannot hurt you. And like any bully, that completely neuters them. They have nothing to fall back on. If you insist upon dealing in substance, it completely disorients them because they have no experience with it. And that was demonstrated in the final response Ellison offered, or at least the final one I bothered to read. He said, quote, "You're obsessed with me, my guy. It's funny whenever I'm confronted with just how much clout I give people in your world. I'm so important to you, it's baffling, but I'm flattered," unquote. And this is the final concession, the final confession, the unconditional surrender. When they get to the point where the only thing they can accuse you of is being weird for caring about the substance of an argument. At no point in this exchange did Ellison even attempt to offer either a premise or supporting evidence. He just hurled conclusions as insults. You're racist, you're token, you're spewing hate. None of it backed up by anything, not even an attempt to demonstrate the validity or truth of any of it. And when I call him out on that, when I completely diffuse him by refusing to play his game, what does he do? Well, he makes it about him. He portrays it as if I wasn't engaging with his claims, I was just drawn to his glorious person because he's so important. He's flattered that I took the time to acknowledge him. Well, I hate to break it to you, Jerry, but I have no idea if you ever responded past this point in our interaction, and I have no intention of checking because my work here is done. I've drawn out the evidence of who you are, what you believe, and the insidious rhetorical tactics that people like you use. And so just like that, your utility ends. You're no more use to me. And I can sleep like a baby knowing that there's no immediate need to acknowledge that you even exist. Still flattered.